Have you ever noticed that the moment your life becomes calm, something inside you tightens? Nothing is wrong. No crisis. No emergency. No one is upset with you. And yet, you feel uneasy, almost suspicious, as if the calm itself were a mistake. You tell yourself you should be grateful, that things are finally going well, that you're safe, stable, even okay. But instead of relief, you feel guilt. A quiet and comfortable guilt that doesn't make sense. You start to wonder if you're missing something, if you're being careless, if this peace is temporary and you're about to pay for it. So you stay alert. You don't fully relax. You don't fully enjoy it. You wait. Because somewhere deep inside, you learn that, when things go well, something bad usually follows. And that belief didn't come from logic. It came from experience. For some people, calm was never neutral. It was the moment before impact. The silence before tension returned. Pause before emotional withdrawal. The fragile balance that could collapse at any time. So when life becomes quiet, your system doesn't read it as safety. It reads it as risk. You might even feel guilty for feeling okay. Guilty for not struggling. Guilty for not suffering. Guilty for not doing more. As if ease were undeserved. As if peace were irresponsible. As if being well meant abandoning something important. And that guilt keeps you alert. It keeps you productive. It keeps you worried. It keeps you emotionally engaged. Because being okay without effort feels wrong. You may have learned that value comes from endurance. That love comes from sacrifice. That worth is proven through struggle. So when struggle disappears, your sense of worth wavers. You don't know who you are without something to fix, without something to carry, without something to hold together. And instead of enjoying the moment, you start creating pressure inside yourself. You think about what you should be doing, what you could be doing better, what might go wrong, because worry feels familiar, and familiarity feels safer than peace. You might even sabotage calm without realizing it. You take on unnecessary responsibility. You overthink. You push yourself harder than needed. Not because you want chaos, but because your system doesn't trust ease. So guilt steps in to replace tension. It whispers that you're lazy, that you're selfish, that you don't deserve to feel good yet. That voice doesn't come from the present. It comes from the past. From environments where being okay meant being careless. Where relaxation meant missing something important. Where safety was temporary and conditional. So your system learned. Stay alert, or you'll lose something. And now, even when life gives you stability, your body refuses to believe it. You keep one foot braced for impact. This is why happiness can feel dangerous. Not because you don't want it, but because it feels unfamiliar. If you grew up in emotional environments where love was tied to effort, peace can feel like abandonment. As if you're leaving behind the role that kept you connected. The role of the one who holds things together. The one who anticipates. The one who sacrifices. So when things finally go well, guilt appears, not to punish you, but to pull you back into a familiar position. A position where you feel useful, necessary, needed. Because being needed feels safer than being at ease. You might even notice that, when life stabilizes, your mind searches for problems. If there's no external crisis, it creates an internal one. Because a calm nervous system feels foreign. And foreign often feels unsafe. So you tell yourself, something must be wrong. I shouldn't relax yet. This won't last. And instead of enjoying what is, you prepare for what might be. This is not pessimism. It's conditioning. Your system learned that stability is temporary and vigilance is protection. So guilt becomes a way to stay prepared. Keeps you from resting too deeply, from trusting too fully, from enjoying too openly. Because enjoyment once came with consequences. So now, feeling good triggers fear. And fear disguises itself as guilt. But this guilt is not a moral failure. It is an emotional memory. A memory that says, when things go well, don't get comfortable. Because comfort once meant danger. This is why the question isn't, why can't I enjoy good moments? The real question is, what did I learn would happen if I did? Because maybe you were never taught how to feel safe without being alert. Maybe peace was never modeled as something you could trust. And now, when life finally softens, your system tightens instead. Not because you're broken, but because you adapted. And adaptation kept you safe once. But it may be keeping you tense now. To understand why guilt appears when things go well, you have to look beyond morality. This guilt is not about right or wrong. It's not about ethics. It's not about having done something bad. It's about having learned that being okay was never neutral. Your emotional system didn't grow up asking, am I allowed to feel good? It asked, is it safe to feel good? And for many people, the answer was no. In certain emotional environments, calm was not a sign of safety. It was a fragile pause. A temporary break before tension returned. So the nervous system learned to associate peace with risk. When things were quiet, something was usually missing. Attention, connection, predictability. And that absence required vigilance. You learned early on that staying alert mattered more than staying relaxed. Because relaxation didn't protect you. Awareness did. This is how guilt begins to form, not as punishment, but as protection. Guilt keeps you engaged. It keeps you monitoring. It keeps you from letting your guard down. And when your system believes that letting your guard down is dangerous, guilt feels necessary. For some people, guilt is tied to responsibility. They learned that their role was to hold things together, to notice shifts in mood, to anticipate problems, to adjust before something broke. In those environments, being okay without effort felt wrong. If you weren't doing something, something must be wrong. So calm became suspicious. And guilt stepped in to restore movement. Because movement meant control. And control meant safety. For others, guilt formed around loyalty. If people around you struggled, suffered, or carried emotional pain, being okay felt like betrayal. Your system learned that staying connected meant sharing the weight. So when you feel lighter, guilt appears, not because you are doing something wrong, but because you are doing something alone. Being okay separates you from the emotional field you learned to belong to. And separation once meant loss. So guilt pulls you back. This is why happiness can feel disloyal. Not logically, emotionally. It feels like you are abandoning something important. For some, guilt comes from unpredictability. When emotional environments shifted suddenly, calm was never stable. Good moments didn't last. So enjoying them felt dangerous. Better to stay alert. Better to expect disruption. Better to prepare. Guilt becomes a reminder. Don't trust this yet. It tells you not to settle into something that might disappear. And because the nervous system values survival over enjoyment, guilt wins. This is also where effort becomes confused with value. If love, approval, or safety once depended on effort, then effort became proof of worth. You mattered because you tried, because you endured, because you stayed involved. So when life finally asks less of you, your sense of value weakens. You might feel undeserving, unnecessary, exposed, and guilt fills that gap. It gives you something to do. It restores a familiar sense of purpose. This is why some people feel more grounded in struggle than in peace. Struggle gives structure. Peace removes it. And without structure, the system feels lost. So guilt recreates structure. Tells you that you should be doing more. That resting is irresponsible. That enjoying is premature. This guilt is not about discipline. It is about identity. Who are you when you are not holding something together? Who are you when nothing is required of you? If your identity formed around endurance, calm can feel like erasure. So guilt protects the identity you learned to survive through. This is also why guilt often appears alongside anxiety. Anxiety scans for danger. Guilt assigns responsibility. Together, they keep the system active. They prevent collapse. They prevent vulnerability. They prevent you from trusting what feels unfamiliar. And peace is unfamiliar. Not because it's wrong, but because it was never consistent. Your system didn't grow up experiencing calm as reliable. So now, reliability feels suspicious. This guilt is also shaped by repetition. Each time calm was followed by disruption, your nervous system reinforced the pattern. This doesn't last. Don't relax yet. Over time, that expectation became automatic. So now, even when nothing goes wrong, your body reacts as if something will. And guilt becomes the emotional signal that keeps you prepared. It reminds you not to get comfortable. It keeps you from enjoying too fully. Because enjoying once meant being unprepared. It's important to understand that this guilt is not trying to hurt you. It is trying to protect you from disappointment, from loss, from emotional shock. It is your system saying, stay ready. But staying ready comes at a cost. It prevents rest. It prevents trust. It prevents presence. And the longer guilt remains the guardian of safety, the harder it becomes to feel at ease. This is why logic doesn't dissolve this guilt. You can tell yourself everything is fine, but your body doesn't respond to arguments. It responds to patterns. And patterns take time to change. The first step is recognizing that this guilt did not appear because something is wrong now. It appeared because something once was. It is a leftover response, a learned reaction. And learned reactions can be unlearned, but only when they are seen clearly, not judged, not forced away, seen. Because the moment you understand that guilt is not a moral signal, but a nervous system memory, its grip begins to loosen. And that opening makes space for something new. Once guilt becomes tied to safety, it doesn't stay hidden in the background. It quietly organizes your adult life. Not through dramatic thoughts, but through small, familiar reactions that feel normal to you. You may notice it first when things begin to improve. Life becomes more stable. Your relationships feel calmer. Your work feels manageable. Your body isn't constantly tense. And instead of relief, guilt appears. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It shows up as restlessness. You feel like you shouldn't enjoy this yet. Like you haven't earned it. like something important is being neglected. So you stay alert. You keep one foot in readiness mode, even when there is no threat. This is how guilt keeps the nervous system active when struggle is no longer required. One of the most common ways this appears is through over-responsibility. When things go well, you start taking on more than necessary. You check in on everyone. You anticipate problems before they exist. You volunteer to carry emotional weight that isn't yours. Not because someone asked you to, but because calm without responsibility feels wrong. Being needed restores a familiar sense of purpose. It recreates the emotional environment, where you learn to feel valuable. So guilt pushes you back into usefulness. Another way guilt shows up is through self-pressure. You raise your own expectations. You create internal deadlines. You convince yourself you should be doing more. Even when life allows you to slow down, you don't. Rest feels irresponsible. Enjoyment feels premature. So you keep pushing, not toward growth, but toward familiarity. Because effort feels safe. This guilt also appears in moments of success. When something goes well, instead of celebrating, you minimize it. You focus on what's missing, on what could go wrong, on what still needs improvement. You don't allow yourself to stay with the good moment. Because staying feels risky. Your system expects a cost. So guilt pulls you out of the present and into preparation mode. This is why joy can feel fragile. Not because it is fragile, but because your system treats it as temporary. Guilt becomes the emotional brake that prevents you from fully enjoying it. In relationships, this guilt can be especially confusing. When a relationship becomes stable, guilt often replaces anxiety. You feel like you're not doing enough, like you're not contributing, like you should be trying harder to keep things alive. You may feel uncomfortable receiving care without giving something back, because being cared for without effort doesn't match the model you learned. So you find ways to reintroduce effort. You fix, you help, you worry, and worry feels like love. But this guilt-driven involvement often drains relationships rather than deepening them, because it's not based on presence. It's based on obligation. Guilt also shows up as difficulty letting go. When something is no longer required, you feel uneasy. You keep responsibilities longer than needed. You stay involved after the problem is solved, because ending the task feels like losing connection. And connection, for you, has always been tied to effort. This is why transitions can be hard. Moments where life naturally lightens can trigger guilt. When a crisis ends, when a project finishes, when a relationship stabilizes, your system doesn't celebrate completion. It searches for the next thing to hold together. Because completion feels like emptiness. This guilt can also turn inward. When life is calm, you may start criticizing yourself. You question your motivation, your discipline, your worth. Not because you are failing, but because you are no longer fighting. And without a fight, your identity feels uncertain. So guilt fills the silence, tells you that you should be doing more. That voice is not your conscience. It is your conditioning. Guilt also affects how you make choices. When given the option to choose ease, you hesitate. You choose the harder path, the heavier option, the one that requires sacrifice, because ease feels undeserved, and sacrifice feels familiar. This is why some people repeatedly choose lives that are more difficult than necessary, not because they enjoy suffering, but because suffering validates their sense of value. Guilt confirms that they are doing enough. Even in moments of rest, guilt stays close. You try to relax, but your mind stays busy. You think about what you're avoiding, what you should be doing instead, what you're falling behind on. So rest never fully restores you, because guilt keeps the system active. This is not laziness. It is hyper-responsibility, a nervous system that doesn't know how to be still without losing connection. This guilt also appears as difficulty trusting good periods. When things go well, you wait for the disruption. You brace yourself. You interpret neutral moments as warning signs. So instead of enjoying stability, you prepare for its end. Guilt supports this vigilance. Tells you that relaxing would be careless. That staying alert is the responsible thing to do. So you remain tense in moments that could be nourishing. Over time, this pattern becomes exhausting. But because it feels familiar, it also feels necessary. You may not even recognize how much guilt is shaping your daily experience. It feels like who you are. But it is not who you are. It is how you adapted. And adaptation does not equal identity. Understanding how guilt operates in your adult life is not about eliminating it overnight. It is about noticing when guilt appears and asking what it is protecting you from. Often, it is protecting you from disappointment, from loss, from vulnerability. But in doing so, it also protects you from presence. And presence is where life actually happens. Seeing this clearly is the beginning of change. Not through force, but through awareness. Because guilt loses power when it is no longer mistaken for truth. To loosen the grip this guilt has on your life, one thing is essential. You need to clearly understand what this guilt is not. Because as long as guilt continues to be misunderstood, it keeps its authority. And this kind of guilt gains strength when it pretends to be something it isn't. This guilt is not a moral compass. It does not mean you have done something wrong. It does not mean you are irresponsible. It does not mean you are failing. If you feel guilty when things go well, it's not because you've crossed a moral line. It's because your nervous system doesn't yet trust safety. Morality asks questions about right and wrong. This guilt asks questions about danger and loss. Those are very different things. This guilt is not intuition. Intuition feels grounded. It brings clarity. It guides without panic. This guilt feels urgent, restless, heavy. It pushes you into action without clear direction. If the feeling pulls you into overthinking, overdoing, or self-criticism, it is not intuition. It is activation. Your body is reacting to the absence of tension, not to a real threat. This guilt is not gratitude. Sometimes guilt disguises itself as responsibility or humility. You tell yourself that feeling guilty keeps you grounded, that it prevents arrogance, that it keeps you from becoming careless. But gratitude expands your emotional capacity. Guilt contracts it. Gratitude allows you to receive. Guilt forces you to prove. If a feeling prevents you from enjoying what is good, it is not gratitude. This guilt is not discipline. Discipline supports growth. It creates structure without punishment. This guilt punishes rest. It shames ease. It treats peace as a weakness. If a feeling motivates you through fear of failure or fear of loss, it is not discipline. It is survival-based control. This guilt is not responsibility. Responsibility is responsive. It adjusts to reality. This guilt is rigid. It does not respond to present conditions. It persists even when there is nothing to fix. If you feel responsible when no responsibility is required, guilt has replaced responsiveness. This guilt is not care. Care is relational. It deepens connection. This guilt isolates you inside your own mind, keeps you busy instead of present, worried instead of connected. If your involvement with others is driven by fear rather than presence, it is not care. This guilt is not love. Love does not demand suffering as proof. If closeness requires exhaustion, self-neglect, or constant effort, what is being protected is not love, it is a pattern. Love does not disappear when you rest. Guilt does. This guilt is not humility. Humility allows you to accept good things without inflation or collapse. Guilt rejects good things outright. It says you haven't earned them, that you should wait, that enjoying them is dangerous. That is not humility. That is fear. This guilt is not loyalty. Loyalty is chosen. This guilt is automatic. It binds you to old emotional contracts you never consciously agreed to. If feeling okay makes you feel disloyal to people, roles, or versions of yourself from the past, guilt is confusing loyalty with attachment. This guilt is not protection anymore. It may have protected you once. It may have kept you alert in environments where calm was unsafe. But protection that never updates becomes a cage. If a response continues long after the danger has passed, it no longer serves survival. It limits life. This guilt is not who you are. This is perhaps the most important distinction. You may feel like guilt is part of your personality, like you are simply a conscientious person, a responsible one, a serious one. But personality does not require constant tension. If guilt disappears the moment you feel truly safe, then guilt was never identity. It was adaptation. This guilt is not truth. It feels convincing because it is familiar. Familiarity often masquerades as truth. But emotional familiarity is not evidence. It is memory. Your body is remembering a rule that no longer applies. This guilt is not warning you about the present. It is reacting to the past. This guilt is not necessary for you to be good. You do not need guilt to care. You do not need guilt to stay ethical. You do not need guilt to be connected. If guilt were required for goodness, peace would be dangerous. And it is not. This guilt is not permanent. It feels persistent because it has been reinforced. But reinforcement can be interrupted. Patterns change when they are no longer mistaken for meaning. The moment you stop asking, "What am I doing wrong?" and start asking, "What is this guilt protecting me from?" something shifts. Because guilt loses authority when it is understood. This guilt is not asking you to suffer. It is asking you to stay familiar. And familiarity once kept you safe. But safety today may look different. This guilt is not asking you to disappear. It is asking you to remain vigilant. But vigilance is not intimacy with life. This guilt is not your enemy, but it is no longer your guide. Seeing what this guilt is not does not make it disappear overnight, but it removes its moral power, turns guilt from a command into a signal that something old is being activated. And signals can be listened to, without being obeyed. Once guilt is no longer confused with truth, space opens. Space for rest without shame. Space for joy without fear. Space for calm without punishment. And in that space, something new becomes possible. When guilt appears in moments that are supposed to feel good, it can feel confusing. You look around and see that nothing is wrong. Your life is stable. Your relationships are calmer. Your body is not in crisis. And yet, something inside you refuses to settle. That refusal is not failure. It is habit. Your nervous system learned to stay alert because alertness once mattered. So when things go well, your system doesn't celebrate. It waits. It waits for the moment when calm breaks. For the moment when ease proves to be temporary. For the moment when you are asked to carry something again. And while it waits, guilt fills the space. Guilt keeps you tense. It keeps you responsible. It keeps you prepared. Because preparedness once meant survival. But survival is not the same as living. Learning to live without guilt as a warning does not mean becoming careless or indifferent. It means learning to tell the difference between safety and danger in the present. It means allowing yourself to notice that nothing is required of you right now. No fixing. No holding together. No emotional labor. Just presence. And presence can feel deeply uncomfortable at first. Because presence asks you to stop performing your role. If you learn to connect through effort, presence can feel like abandonment, not of others, but of yourself as you once knew yourself. So the first step is not to force guilt away. The first step is to recognize it. To notice when guilt appears and gently ask, what is this protecting me from right now? Often, the answer is not a real threat. It is vulnerability. Because when things go well, you are exposed. Exposed to the possibility that peace might last. Exposed to the truth that you are allowed to feel okay. Exposed to a version of yourself that is not defined by endurance. And that exposure can feel terrifying. So guilt steps in to restore distance. It tells you not to relax too much. Not to trust too deeply. Not to enjoy fully. But enjoyment is not recklessness. It is presence. And presence does not erase responsibility. It refines it. When guilt no longer drives you, responsibility becomes responsive rather than compulsive. You respond when something is needed. Not because you fear losing connection, but because you are connected. This is where a new relationship with calm begins. Not as something you must force yourself to like, but as something you learn to tolerate. At first, calm may feel empty. That does not mean it is empty. It means your system is not yet familiar with stillness. And familiarity takes time. You do not need to convince yourself that everything is fine. You need to allow moments of fine to exist without punishment. Without guilt stepping in to question them. This is how trust is rebuilt, not through declarations, but through repetition. Each time you let a good moment pass without self-criticism. Each time you allow ease without adding pressure. Each time you rest without justifying it. Your system learns something new. It learns that calm does not equal danger. That peace does not require payment. That being okay does not mean you are failing. And slowly, guilt loses its urgency. It still may appear, but it no longer controls your behavior. It becomes a signal, not a command. A reminder that something old is being activated. And reminders can be acknowledged without being obeyed. You are not meant to live in constant preparation. You are not meant to earn rest through suffering. You are not meant to feel guilty for being okay. The discomfort you feel when things go well is not proof that something is wrong. It is proof that something is different. And different does not mean dangerous. It means new. So if life feels lighter right now, and guilt shows up uninvited, let it be there, without letting it decide. Let calm exist long enough to reveal itself. Let peace feel unfamiliar without rushing to replace it. Because one day, without noticing when it happened, you will realize something has shifted. You will still care. You will still be responsible. But you will no longer confuse tension with value. And when things go well, guilt will no longer be the loudest voice in the room. Presence will be.